The 165.024, just numbers that are meaningless to the bypasser, but to the watch enthusiast, not only the Omega enthusiast, but to those who know the significance of those numbers, they mark one of the greatest dive watches ever made, the Big Triangle Seamaster 300, or the MOD Seamaster. Begs the question then, of all the models and limited editions that Omega has released until now under the Professional line, why haven't they released this watch? In collaboration with Chrono24, we will be investigating the nuance and differences shared across many of these outstanding models. The beauty of this exercise is that Chrono24 has more than enough watches to refer to as resources, being one of the best online marketplaces for luxury watches, with secure shopping and a free trusted checkout service. Another detail to add is that the group is currently running a giveaway on their YouTube channel. The chance of you winning a 10K voucher and the opportunity to purchase your dream watch. I will link their channel in the corner of the screen now. The first question to ask, why is it that the Seamaster 300 and the Professionals have become so popular, now especially? Beyond it being a dive watch and the popularity surrounding the need for rugged sports watches, I would say for many, it's an excellent Swiss watch from a highly respected name that gets you into this hobby. They are tough, reliable, dependable, offer great value for money. Their movements are some of the best in the industry. They make for versatile all-rounders for all occasions that we can experience without waiting lists, and there are many other good reasons. Simple answer is that there is a great demand for quality dive watches today, and Omega will always deliver. I began my journey with one, and it still is the prized watch in my collection. Think of this video as a study and a discussion made by an enthusiast for enthusiasts, with an aim to forward the idea that many of us in the watch community want to see, having this very special Seamaster realized again. So let's begin with a timeline to bring us up to speed. Over 30 years, we see a handful of stages that show us how the design of this legendary dive watch evolved. In 1948, the name Seamaster officially arrived. Beforehand, in 1932, we had examples like the Marine watch, made for Navy personnel, which used a secondary case to protect the watch from water ingress. They are stunning machines, made a year after the famous JLC Reverso was introduced. And you can see the similarities. The square and rectangular shapes of their time epitomized the Deco movement. The references CK679 and CK680 if you're interested. And by 1936, the Marine was successfully tested to reach a depth of 75 meters. A year later, the watch really gained its footing with a certified rating of around 125 meters, being used by many divers of the time. And remember that these were divers who used pressurized full brass suits to walk on the sea floor with pipes and cables trailing behind them. Can you imagine diving, depending on what was essentially a small dress watch as your chronometer? Another feature that made this watch pretty amazing for its time was the deployant clasp it was given. It actually had an integrated micro-adjust system that could be used over clothing and suits. The system looks fairly similar to what we see with Seiko Prospex dive extension clasps today. But as most of us know by now, in 1957 the Seamaster 300, known as the CK2913, kicked off the diver that we know today. Released as a part of a trilogy with the first Speedmaster and Railmaster. Incredible to think that the two most important watches the company would ever make began during that year. These models had elegant lines, excellent balance on the dial. The Seamaster was a watch that epitomized the dress diver, but also one fitting for a professional. It is one of my favorite sports watches of all time, and I will link a video in the corner of the screen if you want to learn more about the modern development of the 300 line, including the most recent example released in 2021. At this time, there was no defined rule about what made a dive watch, how it was put together, how the dial would read, how legible it needed to be. And during the 50s, a time of outreach where industries were expanding on all fronts, we saw the further exploration of the world, the first use of commercial scuba gear. So to tap into this new market of recreational usage, the dive watch needed to not only appeal to the professional but also to the civilian. And we see that across the industry they adopted similar traits. Most of these pieces were small in size, thin in profile, used lightweight bracelets. There was this established idea that it needed to be suitable for both formal occasions and at times when it needed to be an instrument. And what's surprising is how forward-thinking the original Seamaster 300 was for its time, using a contemporary 39mm case, a 49mm lug length, non-tapering 19mm bracelet. The formula works just as well today as it did back then, and it's quite a leap when we consider that many dive watches at that time were no larger than 35mm in diameter. This early history is such a fascinating time to learn, and how the conceptual approach of making a dive watch was realized. And the traits that make this watch so engaging is how the theme of sharp works through the key components that make up the watch. The batons, hands, case. It shares one of the best relationships between its separate parts, and that's why I believe it to be such a competent looking watch today, even though its application has changed quite a lot over the decades. The reference 2913 had at least 7 variants and lasted for 3 years. Eventually it was replaced by what is commonly known as the transitional 14755, holding true to those original 50s design aesthetics when looking at the dial, but the biggest step forward since its inception happened in 1962, with the introduction of the reference 165.014, still using the same case and bracelets as the previous generations, but the dial and handset received quite an update. And here now is an example of a watch that we can see epitomizes the 60s. Simpler pencil-styled hands, and now replacing the sharpness of the previous generation of batons, the dial now uses trapezoidal squares and rectangles. What does this combination do? It shows a sign of change, where the dive watch needed to exceed expectations and appear more as a tool instead of anything fashionable. This new arrangement increased legibility, which was a key requirement as the years went on for the professional dive watch. And as we arrive to the later parts of the 1960s, we see the legendary example of the 165.024. What many don't mention is that this truly is the original professional Seamaster. The others were used by professionals and recreational divers, but we can credit this watch as the first true example, especially because it adopted the professional case for the first time. This watch was built to specifications set by the Ministry of Defense. But like the early editions of the Seamaster, some previous examples of these don't bear all of the hallmarks that make them as official looking. Some give off the impression that their dials were just fitted into professional cases, but the true examples had a few nuances that made them very unique. Broad, gladius sword hands, and a fully graduated bezel is what defined them. Some extremely rare examples used a Circle T hallmark on the dial, indicating tritium usage, but this was not very common when looking at them collectively. And you can also tell that there is one notable distinction between the first and the second generations of the MOD Seamasters. First generation used a dial with full Arabic numerals set at each quarter. The second adopted a broad triangle at the 12. And it's this model that is the definitive answer. The big triangle. MOD Seamasters were issued to both the British Navy and Army between 1967 and 1971, with an engraving on their casebacks that differentiated them. What does it have that makes it such a competent looking instrument? It's all about the presence on the wrist. I have been very fortunate to experience one of these models in the metal before, and that's the impression it gives you. The professional case not only adds more substance, a feeling that it's more rugged, but it's that perfect size that makes it all the more proficient feeling as a dive watch. And then it's the balance between the parts. Nothing feels overblown or oversized. There are no superfluous details on the dial. It meets all the requirements for legibility without compromising the original Seamaster's design language. Also, it doesn't hurt that it set the blueprint for the other MOD dive watches that would follow in later years, like the famous Rolex MilSub CWC models. We entered the 1970s, where we saw some of the most bizarre creative ideas put into wristwatches, and for the Seamaster, nothing says the 70s more than the Ploprof, or Plongeur Professionnel, one of the most repulsive, coolest, misunderstood creatures of the deep. A video about that will be in the corner of the screen now. The Seamaster of the 80s, also known as the pre-Bond, is another seriously underrated model in this lineup, having more of a structured-looking dial, adopting more of a typical diver approach of dots and dashes. And the Seamaster of the 90s, known as the Bond, saw the start and development of the modern professional line that we know all too well. Now yes, we have received some peculiar alterations that do leave many people on the fence. the now ubiquitous, for the professional diver, helium release valve. It's increased in size over the years and is now more of an external feature that makes the line more recognizable at a glance. The whole idea does give the watch a more professional look, no doubt, but many would also agree that they would prefer the watch without the configuration. The skeletonized sword hands, another staple that divides opinion. As we have seen these models grow and evolve over the last few decades, so the interest and demand for them has increased steadily. So before answering the question about Omega and their, I believe, inevitable release of the MOD Seamaster in the future, let's look at the stats linked to the top most sought after and in-demand Seamasters today on Chrono24. The ranking from left to right on the screen. It comes as no surprise that the most modern models, both black and blue on bracelets, are the top sellers. Close behind is the previous generation, the first ceramic variant in black. And in fourth is the Seamaster 300. Fifth is the most modern ceramic variant on a rubber strap, and the trend continues, seeing models like the Great White on a rubber strap. The top 5 countries where sales through Chrono24 is most popular: Germany, United States, United Kingdom, France, and Italy. We all know that these models are popular, that they have a great history and have a serious impact in the watch world. And it's quite something to see how the design language of these watches have evolved to, we could say, adapt with the times. On to the topic of the 165.024. The ultimate Seamaster. Why would an example like this work so well in today's climate? Not only do we want efficient modern watches, but the love for vintage-inspired pieces has never been greater. One such example that has a cult following is the reference 2254.50, which is arguably the closest watch we've seen linked to this older styling, and it epitomizes so much of what makes the original great. You can see that it is almost a blatant tribute to those past references. There is also a line of watches that draw close inspirations from the MOD model, and that's the Planet Ocean. They are very popular, but aren't as competitive when we look at where the demand is today. We've noticed that the design of these pieces haven't received the same amount of attention since they were first introduced in the early 2000s. Many of these models are offered as the larger option, the bigger brother, sitting in the ballpark of 44 millimeters, diving to twice the depth of 600 meters, compared to the more universal professional 300. And in an effort to evolve this particular model, the Planet Ocean line, Omega has taken the blueprint, but also moved beyond the design of the MOD Seamaster in the process. And if we are to observe how easy it would be to make a flawless modern recreation of the MOD, why haven't they done it? Well, I believe that it is an ace up their sleeve, and we will be seeing a model like this launched in the next few years, judging especially by how well the newly revived professionals have been. It shows that the modern step forward has been successful. Then if we are to look at the newest launch of the Speedmasters, how they have drawn from past nuances to create an all-round homage to itself and its past exploits, while still remaining relevant to its design styling, another plus. The Seamaster 300 releases with their callback to past references and more vintage-inspired motifs. All of these factors show that there is a huge possibility that not only the Planet Ocean will receive a facelift, but the 165.024, or the variant with the date, the 166.024, could be a very plausible concept. And for a second, imagine how much of a success it would be. In this quick mock-up, you can see the idea realized, streamlined, abandoning the superfluous. As far as a competitive dive watch, this would take on the likes of models that retail for double the amount. Throw in one of the best coaxial movements they make today, a clear caseback, a range of strap options. The size and presence is all there, the aesthetics are all balanced, well considered. It's a dive watch that has the qualities of a field watch. It's simple enough to work with anything. And for a watch that epitomizes not only good design, but a design that truly belongs to Omega alone, it has all the potential of being one of the greatest dive watches the brand has ever brought forward to the civilian market. The question I have to ask, would a model like this appeal to you? A genuine recreation of the original? I just feel like it's foolproof. And maybe you can all share testimonials in the comments that will hopefully reach Omega one day. Maybe we can be the few that set this idea in motion. To close off this subject, There are so many examples of the Seamaster out there for you to choose. Not only the ones that are popular, but the outliers are equally as exciting. There are many of us here, probably more than we can count, who have owned one or several in our lives. And at this stage, as we move up the tiers of watch collecting, it's almost a rite of passage to experience one of these timepieces. And if you like any of the examples you've seen, I'll be putting the links below for you to learn more about them. And thank you to Chrono24 for another collaborative video, allowing me to share my passion and appreciation for design with all of you. A link to their YouTube channel will be in the corner of the screen. And don't forget about the giveaway they are running that you could be a part of. Of all the watches on the market today, there are few out there that interest me as much as the original professional Seamaster. To me at least, it feels like a near perfect example of a dive watch, of a functional instrument that bears all of the character traits of something truly efficient. Call it self-indulgence, call it a vanity project, but the thought of seeing this model recreated and on the wrist of avid enthusiasts would make me smile, especially knowing that we, as a community, may have played a part in the process and have managed to share our love of design and history with a greater part of the watch world.